Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Today, we have with us Bianca, who is an engineering major or manager at Postmates/Uber. She also does some mobile software development on the side, currently living in the Bay Area, but she's from Canada. And her past work experiences include Fandango, Rotten Tomatoes, and outside of work, she also has a lot of other interests, including being a yoga instructor, which is pretty neat. So I'm going to hand it off to Bianca. She's going to chat more about her journey to tech, and at any point during this, if you have any questions, feel free to just blurt out questions or send them in the chat. And also, last reminder that we do have this being recorded and posted later, so make sure your parents are okay with your video being on. But otherwise, I think we're good. So whenever you want to start, Bianca, let me know if you have any issues with screen sharing.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for having me today. I'm happy to share my experiences with you and answer any questions you may have about coding and computers and just getting into it for work. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you all see that okay? Great. Oh, wait, where'd it go? There. Okay, so my journey to tech. Thanks again for coming today and sharing this experience with me. So as Ryan mentioned, my name is Bianca. I'm an engineering manager at Postmates, and more recently its parent company, Uber, which it bought out as part of a merger. So that's why I still claim both of them. This is all very recent. It only happened this month. So I only became a new employee as of March 1st. Really recent. Outside of work, I'm an active member of the tech community, and I particularly enjoy working with students and people new to tech and just people who are early to their careers and to their work lives. Here is a sample of some of the events where I did talks. There's also some screens here of some articles I wrote that were published online and some fun side projects. So the latest project that I've been working on during lockdown is behind the scenes webcomics. So that's the picture in the bottom left and the bottom right, where I just illustrate some everyday events in a cute and fun way in English and in Italian. So right now, another side project is I'm learning Italian. So I'm using this opportunity to translate some phrases here and there and hopefully doing it correctly.
I love that.
So now, thank you. So now for why we're all here today, to talk about my journey to tech and the ups and downs and side to sides of how I got to where I am today. So first, we'll jump back to the past, childhood. Honestly, it was fairly typical in the sense that I was a child. I didn't really have much knowledge or interest in tech or coding or computers, and I knew even less about what kind of work there was back then or what would be available now. So without exposing how old I am, it was a very different time back then when you had to connect to internet using your phone and it was limited what you can do, versus now you have smartphones and apps and just so many things that I couldn't have imagined back then. So my main exposure to tech and to work life was just my parents. My mom was an accountant, so she used a lot of Excel, so that's just like lists and numbers and doing calculations. And my dad was an engineer, but not a software one. He was more a civil engineer, so he designed more bridges or roads or things that are more around city planning. And that was really all my exposure to computers. I had no idea what they did, and I really had no idea what else anyone did. I'm like, oh, they work on a computer all day. That sounds kind of boring, to be honest. However, my mind was changed when I went to high school and things started to get a little more interesting. This was the first time I started to get exposure to the types of careers out there. And I started to discover I had an affinity for math and science, even though at the time I still didn't have much interest in computers. I only took one computer class back then, which did give me more exposure to what my parents did, but that was mostly just business side computer things. So making PowerPoint, like slide presentations like this one, or just writing out reports using Microsoft Word, and not actual coding on a computer yet. while I was still in high school, I did what I'd always learned was supposed to come next, and I went to university or college, or rather, I applied to a bunch of them, and then I went to the one that I happened to get into. It was challenging back then to decide what you want to do with your life. You're a teenager, and suddenly someone's saying, "Oh, you need to go to college and choose something that you want to do for the rest of your life." But I still didn't have a keen sense of what I wanted to do. I did know I still was inclined to math. So most of the programs that I applied to were math or math related. And I figure I would just go from there and see what happens. Eventually, I ended up at the University of Waterloo in their math and business program. So this is a school in Canada. Why did I choose math? I was good at it. And why did I choose business? It seemed like a good idea at the time. It seemed general enough that I can learn things in school that I'd be able to use later on, even though I still didn't have a strong sense of what I would be using that for. Fortunately, this school was also my first exposure to computer programming. And if I'm being honest, I was really bad at it in the beginning, like absolutely terrible. It just didn't make sense. I didn't know how were people pulling out these ideas from thin air and suddenly translating them into a computer. But fortunately, as we all know, it got better. Eventually, with more practice, I even started to like it. It became a lot easier and it made a lot more sense to me. So I studied, I did all the projects and the exams, but I still wasn't totally convinced that this was something I wanted to do. But that's not quite the end of that story either. So after I graduated from school, I went to work at an insurance company, and of all things, I was a computer programmer. So I was able to get more exposure into what it was like to do computer programming in an actual work environment. And let me tell you, it was so much more interesting than what I was doing in school, because now I was writing things and building things that people were actually using in their day-to-day work lives, instead of just studying theory and math and writing things for school projects that never really saw the light of day. So after working for full-time for a year, I decided to go back to school to learn more about this thing that I like and I was also kind of good at. So this time I went to McMaster University, which is another school in Canada, and I did a degree in software engineering. This time it was a master's degree, so there was extra research I had to do. And the research that I did was basically writing something that wrote more things. So for example, if you want to write code and you have a list of words that you want to sort in alphabetical order. So this research that I did was writing code that would write it in other languages for you. So you only had to write it once, but now you had it in 10 different formats, which I thought was pretty cool. So around the tail end of that, I started to apply to more coding jobs. Now that I was more convinced that this was something I wanted to continue learning and something I wanted to do. So one thing I did know is that I wanted to move to the US from Canada, and at least for a little while, just to figure out what it's like, see if I like it, learn more things and meet new people. And in case you didn't know, moving countries for work can be challenging because you're starting totally new, you don't really know anyone, and you're just trying to find companies that you might have heard of and just hoping for the best. So at this point, it was at least really a numbers game, like just applying to as many jobs as I could and going to interviews, and all the while learning more along the way. So admittedly, not all of them were a success. Sometimes I would go and talk to people and meet a bunch of people at the company and just totally bomb. But the advantage of that is I learned what worked and what didn't, and you can really learn from the mistakes there. So it gets easier the more interviews you do. So finally, I did my first job that I felt was a good fit for me, for my experience, for what I was looking for, and for what I wanted to grow into. and I packed my bags and moved to California. So my first real programming job was at Flickster, which is the company behind Rotten Tomatoes movie and TV ratings website. And if neither of those really seems familiar to you, then you might be more familiar with its parent company, which is Warner Brothers, and later on Fandango, which is the movie ticket company. I worked at these companies for 4 years, and essentially I was just applying what I had learned in school to grow from a more entry and junior level developer into a more senior role. So being a software engineer over these years, I had a different set of responsibilities that needed different sets of skills and experiences. So some of the things I did in this time was building websites and building iPhone and Android apps, in particular the Rotten Tomatoes website, and then the phone app that went with it on the iPhone. Then I also had to explore new ideas because you don't want to get stuck in a rut for too long. I tested out some new designs and features, and I also provided support to users. So the skills I gained from doing all these tasks and more was especially building out the mobile apps is what helped me land my next job, which is at Postmates. And I work on the driver iPhone and Android phone apps. So if you or your family or your friends have ever ordered Postmates or DoorDash or Uber Eats or one of those, then this is the app that the drivers would use to be able to deliver your order. But wait, that can't be the end of the story either, because there is one more circle here. So jumping ahead a little bit, I grew from that coding and engineering role and ultimately became the manager of a team. So not only was I continuing to do the work I was doing, now I was helping to mentor and grow other people to be able to code and do it successfully as well. Then more recently, Postmates and Uber merged together. So that's where we are today. And like I mentioned before, this happened very recently. This just happened at the beginning of the month. So I am still working as an engineer and I still code, but now in addition to coding and helping grow other people, I also need to help organize their work. So I would help think of new projects and features and put a priority to those so we know which ones are most important and which ones maybe we can wait till next year to do, and all that jazz. So based off this, well, relatively simple design, it's been quite a journey from childhood to manager, and I'm excited to see what would come next. But this isn't quite the end of the presentation yet, because it's great to share my experiences, but I think what might be more helpful is what can you learn from this, or what have I learned that I can help pass on to you? So lessons learned along the way. The first one I noted was it's okay to not know what you want to do yet. So if you already know it, great. If not, that's okay too. And if you decided now, but then you later change your mind, know that you're not stuck in your first decision, because you don't need to follow just a linear, like one way of doing things. Like I mentioned, this is a super simple picture, but from what I'm saying, you can tell, oh no, things kind of went all over the place. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I backtracked, I went back to school, but eventually it all came to a goal. So on the right side here too, is you can see another example of some places I've worked at or volunteered at or met people at, and projects and anything else. So just know that this is only a small sample of what I've done and who I've interacted with, and there's so many more that I just can't fit, because the experiences you gain along the way all build up. So you get new experiences, you get new skills, and you meet a lot of people along the way, and they can help you get to know yourself a little better and help you figure out what you want to do. So again, it's okay to not know what you want to do yet. Another good point I like to tell people, even the current people that I'm working with now, is you can level up your skills and experiences with volunteering and side projects. So school is great and it can take you far. Work is great, it can take you far. And meeting new people can take you far, but you can help take yourself and your skills to the next level by volunteering and working on your own projects on the side. And not only will this give you a chance to do things that you already know how to do, but it'll also give you the opportunity to learn new things that maybe you haven't had a chance to do yet. And you can meet some like-minded people along the way who you might not have had a chance to meet. So a great example of this is if you are learning some things through Girls Code, or you just want to build your own website, or you just want to practice some of the things you do, then you can create a project for yourself from start to finish. And that way you have the flexibility to make it what you want to make it. So this is actually a really good segue into the next and final lesson, which is just to have fun. You don't need to take yourself too seriously. You don't need to decide, okay, my first project will be this project A, and it's going to make me this much money, and it's going to have this many users. Like, no, just have fun with it, learn from it. And ultimately, while you are working towards the goal, towards your future career or your future goal, just enjoy the journey. And yeah, that's all I have for today. So thanks again for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have here, or please feel free to connect with me and I can answer questions privately if you prefer that. Okay, thank you.
I love that. And I think so many of your lessons are really great. And it's a great reminder for our girls that you don't need to know exactly what you want to do yet, but this is just an example of a path that you could take. So thank you so much for sharing this. I think my first question and something I'd love to chat about is with the iOS mobile development. I'm sure all of our girls have their favorite apps and maybe some apps you've used that aren't so fun to use. Maybe they're frustrating in some way. So if any of you girls have stories of apps that don't work well, or maybe you don't like the interface, you should definitely share them. But Bianca, what's something that you did when you were working on the apps to make them easy for people to use?
That's a really good question. So for the latest app that I was working on, which is the driver app, it's interesting when you approach that question, because it was very easy for me to be testing it because I'm sitting at my desk and I'm just tapping around. But it was more challenging for drivers to use it because they need to use the app while driving and their hand is moving, and it could be a little harder to use or less intuitive. So some things that were done to make it easier is just think about these considerations. It might be easy to sit here and test, but being in a real world environment, you have to take those things into consideration. So one simple solution was just making the buttons bigger and making the text bigger. They seem simple, but it could really help the users in the long run. Another one is we had user testing where people would actually go out and use the new version of the app, and some of us were sitting in their backseat and just watching them interact with it. And that was a really great way to get feedback and just see what do they expect to happen versus what are we expecting to happen, so that we can try to find that middle ground and match their expectations to how we expect the app to work. Makes it easier for everyone.
Theta has a great question in the chat. What was your motivation to continue learning about computers, even when it didn't really make sense?
That is a really great question. I think everyone would have a different answer to that. Mine is the side projects and networking. So even now, even working in this field for some years, there are some times that I'm like, okay, this is all right, but it's kind of boring on some days or weeks. And that's where either finding your own projects within work or within school, or taking it totally out of there and just thinking of your own things to do can really help like re-spark your interest. So one thing I touched a little bit on, but I didn't dive into too much detail, was I started off doing iPhone apps, but when I was starting to feel like, oh, this is kind of second nature, I can code in my sleep, I decided to learn Android. And it was good because it was me coming from a place where I understand the mobile user experience, but now I need to learn this entirely new technology and new language, and that helped bring back that interest in me.
Another question that I have is with your schooling in the master's program with software engineering, did you find that there were an equal number of women and men, or were you kind of outnumbered? And how has your experience been working in the tech field, specifically being a woman?
That's a great question. Let's see if I can find that photo. Okay, here I find is actually a pretty good example. So in school, no, it was not even, it wasn't even close, unfortunately. When I was doing my master's, I think there were 10 women engineers, and then the rest were men and non-binary and other genders. So it is skewed. That's something that we all continue to strive to improve. So the fact that you're all here today is a really great sign for that, and just expressing interest early on is, I think, a really great sign. Even though the numbers are skewed, I find where I work currently, the women have very strong personalities. So it doesn't even out the playing field by any means, but I find that as we continue to participate and we continue to stay involved, it can really help to not only increase the number as more of us join, but it can also improve the experience for anyone who comes to the future in the future.
I remember my robotics class, a sophomore year of high school, there were only 2 girls and the rest were all guys. I'm curious if any of you girls, have you been in a class before where it's super skewed one way or the other?
My last semester woodshop class is actually just me and another girl and like 18 other guys. So that one was kind of weird, but I had known the teacher and it wasn't like, and he did get to put his input on what students he wanted, but honestly, I don't think it was because that like he didn't want girls doing it. It was just like, I feel like not a lot of women actually like go into that part of stuff.
Sure.
They kind of don't want to be doing that, or they do and they just like don't show it. But yeah, I think it's kind of interesting how that is.
Yeah, definitely. Did you think it was kind of fun to be like one of the only 2 girls, or was it uncomfortable at times?
No, it was pretty fun because there are a lot of things that all the guys would be kind of cocky about, and I just come up and I beat them at their own little game, and it's like really funny when they just, oh my gosh, you got beat by a girl. Like, yeah, you did. So yeah.
I love that. Anyone else? Have you had a class? Oh, sorry, Bianca.
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna add on that it can be a little bit intimidating at times, but I find once you're in and you're just showing what you know and what you've learned, it can like, you start to notice less over time.
Absolutely. And hopefully your teacher or your boss or whoever it is treats everyone fairly. And I think that's what matters, especially.
I know at my work and also previous companies, we even have special ERGs, which are employee resource groups. And that's when we start targeting the underrepresented groups. So there's one for women in engineering, and that's intended to be a safe space for women in engineering and for allies who just want to help promote that in the work environment.
Theta says her 4th grade class only had 7 guys and the rest were girls, so it's kind of the opposite.
Wow.
That's so interesting. I wonder if there were just less boy 4th graders that year, or how that worked out. But that's funny.
Yeah, I was wondering if that's just the one class, or if just does that mean there's another class out there with more boys than girls?
I have a question about your schooling. Do you regret going to the university your first time for math and business, or do you wish that you could like just redo it and go directly into software development?
Great question. I've given that some reflection myself, and I do sometimes tell myself, oh, if I learned this from the beginning, I would have saved so much time, and I only would have had to go to school once, which saves like time and money. But now when I look back on that, I'm glad things worked out the way they did, because if I didn't go and get that degree the first time, I never would have had exposure to computer programming, so I would have no idea if I liked it. But now that I'm a manager, I find I'm using more of those business skills. So I mentioned before, I just took it because, oh, it seemed like a good idea and very general. And that seemed to really benefit where I am now. Because one challenge I'm finding that some of the people I work with who are engineers or people in tech is sometimes they don't have as strong communication skills, or perhaps they're more introverted. And these are all things you can work with, but I do find I am reaching back into what I had learned in school and reapplying it to what I'm doing now, and just using those communication and business skills more actively.
Akriti, I've always thought that your story was interesting of what you studied versus the company that you're currently at. You should maybe share that, because I think the flip-flop is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's actually, Bianca, it was interesting hearing your story because I went to school for actuarial science, which is also math and business, but specifically for insurance. And I work in an insurance company now, but my first job was a tech startup. So in my first job, I also learned how to code. And that's what got me started in the coding journey. So yeah, I fully agree. You know, it's important to have both of those skill sets. And I'm actually going back for my master's right now in business. So I'm trying to get more of that business, like leadership skill. So yeah, I always find it so fascinating how I think when we were in school, we learned that you like decide what you're going to be and you become that thing or that person. But most adults change their career path. And that's just really fascinating. And I think important for the girls to remember that what you decide right now isn't what you're going to be necessarily or what you have to be.
Yeah, that makes me wonder, how many of you girls have parents who've switched jobs or switched careers or companies? Any like drastic switches or just similar companies?
My mom used to be a manager at Finish Line. She didn't really know what she wanted to do, but after she was manager there for a while, I think then she moved to Lincoln, and now she works at State Capitol in the treasurer's office. So it's kind of like still kind of in business, dealing with money and stuff, but like seeing like a manager at Finish Line to now like just in there. Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. And I just love that lesson. I think it's great to remember that you're never stuck. You can chase any dream, you can move anywhere you want.
One thing I love about tech in particular, especially at this time, is it's become a lot easier to switch into. So a lot of my coworkers and friends had similar backgrounds to me in that they studied something totally different in school. And then it was in more recent years that they decided, oh, okay, I'm going to take a coding boot camp and learn how to become an engineer. Or similarly, my sister went back to school and she did a boot camp, but she's doing more the design side of tech. So that's something to keep in mind as well. Regardless of if you like programming or not, there are so many other careers in tech, if that's the space that you're interested in, that there's usually a match. And especially as more time goes by, there's just new careers being created.
Another question, what is your favorite part about your job?
Oh, that one's so hard to answer. I still have that slide up with all the photos, so this is the first answer that comes to mind. That just, I love the fun parts, the ones that don't really have anything to do with work. Just because I think, at least partially, it's important in the work environment to have a sort of non-work relationship with your coworkers as well, because it helps to build trust and then it helps you communicate more easily. So that's one thing. But another thing in my current role that I really like is helping other people grow in their careers. Like it was mentioned in my intro, I'm a yoga instructor and an aerial hoop instructor. So I think, and in school, I was also a tutor. So I think that teacher element of me has always been there. So I like being able to apply that to my work now and help other people grow in their careers.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So do you have like a nickname for your like little group?
For which little group, sorry?
Your like little work group?
No, not really. A lot of the work groups I'm in are either official, so women in tech, or the unofficial ones tend to just be friends. So we just meet each other at work and hang out. Yeah, but no name. That sounds like a fun idea, though. I should bring that back to them and ask if we can think of a fun nickname. We do that for events sometimes too. So in a lot of examples where we do team building events, we'll split the larger teams up into smaller teams and think of names and dances and all that fun stuff. So that's a little more challenging now with online learning.
Definitely. We have another wonderful question from Theta. When you were a child, what did you think that you would end up being?
I thought I would be a teacher. Yeah, so I'd always been interested in like math and in teaching, so it seemed like the perfect intersection. Prior to my parents' more recent jobs of accountant and engineer, they were actually teachers too. So they came to Canada from the Philippines, and in the Philippines, they were both teachers. So it just seemed to make so much sense to me. Like, oh, they did it, and it seems to match all my interests. Yeah.
What did your parents teach?
My mom taught chemistry and my dad taught math.
Right.
So I think I was a lot more tightly tied to their, or back then I thought I was more tightly tied to their destiny. But now still applies, as still applying the teaching skills and the technical skills, but in a less direct way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think another thing that I wanted to be when I was growing up was a writer. So I think that was my first set of side projects, just writing short stories and poems and doing all that. So.
That's cute. I know it's not quite the same thing, but I think your comics are probably a similar creative outlet that it's very nice to have. Theta says she does that too. Do you write, Theta? Do you like doing creative writing, like short stories?
Yes. I actually created a short little book series of these mini stories about this like one girl who has these crazy dreams about different weird jobs. Like once she was a superhero and then she was like a spy and an astronaut.
That's so wonderful. Oh, that's so cute.
Oh, I love that.
What an awesome side project. See, even Bianca's lesson about side projects and learning things outside of work applies to all of you. So if you're ever interested in something outside of school, you can work on that in your free time. You can join a club, do something on the weekend, even girls code. I mean, you're all doing that right now with learning how to code on the side. So I think that's a wonderful skill to have. Do y'all have any other questions for Bianca?
I was just going to add, you never know where that's going to lead, because it might start off as just a side project, but then you're going to meet so many people along the way, and you never know if you'll need to reach out to them later and say, oh, I see, like, I know you because you write stories, but I also see you work on apps. Like, would you like to collaborate on one or talk more about it? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's a great way to meet people.
Yeah, I have one for you. What's something that you were not expecting when you switched into tech? Something that caught you by surprise.
One thing, I think it's both a good and a bad thing. One thing is working longer hours than I used to, because when I worked in an insurance company, it was very like, okay, you start at this time and you end at this time. And now, because everything's on a laptop, you bring the laptop everywhere. So I find I'm working, even before all the work from home stuff, I found I was working a lot more from home. So that ended up being partially a good thing, because putting in all the extra time helped me learn more. Sometimes it was just fun and I just didn't notice what time it was. You just look at the time and realize, oh my goodness, it's 8 o'clock already. I should probably stop. But it's a balance, because it can also be a bad thing if you find you're doing that too much and then you start to get tired. So good and bad, but either way, unexpected.
If you could say you had one person that like inspired you to do what the job you have now, who would you say it would be and why?
Ooh, that's a good one. I don't think I've ever given that one much thought. I can't think of any one person that inspired me like specifically to do what I'm doing now. Since becoming an engineer, though, I have found some who have continued to inspire me to want to keep doing it. And those tend to be the people who have that work-life balance. So of course, it's always impressive when someone is very good at coding or very good at what they do. But I find that the ones that motivate me are the ones who can balance, family with their work, or I don't know if any of you have seen this article, but there's a Victoria's Secret model who's also a coder. And I just thought that was cool to think, oh, you have this two totally different lives. So yeah, sorry, I'm not able to think of just one person, but that's the theme I tend to be inclined towards.
These are all such great questions. Oh, we've got another one in the chat. How to improve programming logic? Many times I fail to develop a programming, so I've become frustrated. So how do you deal with that situation of becoming frustrated?
Let's see. I mean, it does get frustrating sometimes. I think this is a big question to answer, but one thing I try to keep in mind is if you have a task you're trying to accomplish, that it helps to break it down into smaller steps. And then as you accomplish those smaller steps, they might not seem like a lot, but when you look back on them later, you realize how far you've come. I think one really great example of that is just look at something you coded a long time ago. It might have been very challenging back then, and you might have been very frustrated with it, but you realize looking back, okay, I accomplished it, and this is how I was able to do it. So you both have a sense of appreciation for what you've already learned, and it can also just help to continue to motivate you that if that's what you were able to accomplish last time, that means you can only go forward from here. And if it's any help or any consolation, this is a challenge that people continue to face. So if you've been a programmer for 1 year or 10 years, you're going to keep finding this. You're going to keep facing these challenges, but that's a good thing. That means you're continuing to challenge yourself so that you learn more. If you reach a point that things are just so easy, then you're not challenging yourself anymore and you're not learning anything new. So even though it can be frustrating at times, know that you're moving in the right direction. A really good analogy I've heard of that is if you've played video games, anytime it starts to get really hard or you have to face a boss, it's a bad thing, right? Like, oh, it's hard, it can be stressful. But then when you finish it, you realize, oh, I finished the level. So that means I moved up, I moved forward in the game.
Absolutely. That is such great advice. And the piece about looking back on old code that you've written also reminds me of anyone who's an artist. Sometimes they'll be critical of their own work and they'll think, oh, this drawing's not that great, but look back to what you drew a year ago. Everyone's definitely improved if they just put the time in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same with writing or dancing or other skills that you may have. I don't know about you all, but sometimes I'll even make a face when I see my old code. Like, I can't believe I wrote it like that. What was I doing?
All right, girls, do you have any other questions for Bianca?
If you do think of more later, please feel free to pass them on through Girls Code, and then they can be passed on to me and I'd be happy to answer any more.
Perfect. We can definitely do that. So if you ever have any questions, we will email Bianca. Just send them our way. Wonderful. All right. Bianca, thank you so much for taking this time to chat with us. We really appreciate it. And it was super interesting to learn about your journey to tech. And I hope it inspired all of the girls to not only chase their dreams, but don't be stuck on one path. You can explore different areas, especially outside of school and outside of work. So thank you so much for talking with us. And thank you girls all for submitting questions and for joining us. We don't currently have a speaker planned for next week, but we will have more in April. So make sure to keep up with the newsletter and social media to see when our next speaker is. All right, Akriti, I think that's all.
Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.